In the flickering gaslight of 1817, London secrets were the most valuable currency, and a mask could hide anything: a commoner's birth, a vengeful heart, a desperate gamble. For one woman attending the Duke of Argyll's grand masquerade was the most dangerous night of her life. She moved through the gilded ballroom as Lady Seraphina Beaumont, a phantom of nobility she had painstakingly created. But one man, a duke, with eyes as dark and knowing as the midnight sky, saw through the feathers and silk, and with a single devastating whisper, he would prove that the most elaborate mask cannot hide the truth from a man who is determined to find it. The air in the Argyle House ballroom was thick with the scent of beeswax, expensive French perfume, and the sweet, cloying aroma of secrets. Hundreds of candles blazed in the crystal chandeliers, their light fracturing into 1,000 diamonds against the silk satins and jewels of London's high society. Everyone who was anyone was here, their true faces hidden behind masks of velvet porcelain and pearl, and among them was Elara Vance, though tonight she was Lady Seraphina Beaumont. Her mask was a delicate creation of silver filigree and swan feathers obscuring the top half of her face, but leaving her determined chin and mouth exposed. Her gown, a deep sapphire silk, borrowed on precarious credit, felt like a suit of armor. Every polite nod, every graceful turn of her wrist was a rehearsed movement in a deadly play. For 3 months, she had been Lady Seraphina, the mysterious and enchanting newcomer to the Tun, and for 3 months she had been a complete and utter fraud. Her target was in view. Lord Harrington, a man with a politician's smile and a predator's eyes, was holding court near the grand fireplace. He was the reason for this entire charade. He was the man who had stolen her father's architectural genius, presenting his revolutionary bridge designs as his own, and had left Thomas Vance, ruined, broken, and in an early grave. Elara's secret was her identity. Her mission was to find the original blueprints her father had signed, the only proof that could expose Harrington and restore her family's name. "Lady Seraphina, you are a vision tonight," a voice purred beside her. It was Lord Ashworth, a foppish baron she'd been deflecting for weeks. She offered him a cool, practiced smile. "You are too kind, my lord. The magic is all in the mask, I assure you." "Then I should count myself lucky to be speaking to the magic itself," he simpered. She needed to get closer to Harrington to overhear his conversations, to learn where he kept his private papers. But Ashworth was a persistent gnat. As she sought a polite escape, she felt a sudden, profound shift in the room's atmosphere. The hum of conversation seemed to dip the music to soften. A path was clearing through the throng, and down it walked a man who wore his power, not in the jewels on his person, but in the very air he displaced. He was Alistair Finch, the Duke of Blackwood. His mask was simple, unadorned black leather that seemed only to intensify the piercing gaze of his dark eyes. He was a man of shadow and substance in a room of glittering frivolity. Rumours clung to him like his own shadow, that he was ruthless in business, that he had a tragic past, that he had no time for the foolish games of the court. He rarely attended such events, and his presence tonight was an anomaly that set tongues wagging. Elara's heart hammered against her ribs. He was an unforeseen complication. The Duke of Blackwood was known to be a silent partner in several of Harrington's industrial ventures. He was an associate of the very man she sought to destroy. An enemy. She instinctively turned away, hoping to be lost in the crowd, a sapphire ghost in a sea of color. But it was too late. His gaze swept the room, and for a heart-stopping moment, it snagged on hers. It felt as if he wasn't looking at her mask, but straight through it, into the terrified soul of Elara Vance, the artist's daughter, from a forgotten corner of Bloomsbury. She turned her back completely, her breath catching in her throat. She would leave. The risk was too great. Harrington would be at other events. She began to move toward the French doors leading to the terrace, her escape route planned. A hand, firm but gentle, landed on her arm. She froze. Leaving so soon, Lady Seraphina. The voice was a low baritone, a rich, smooth sound that vibrated through her entire being. It was the Duke of Blackwood. She turned slowly, schooling her features into a mask of polite surprise. Your Grace, I was merely seeking a breath of fresh air. The room is rather warm. It is, he agreed, his eyes never leaving hers. They were closer now, and she could see the sharp intelligence in their depths. He hadn't released her arm. His touch was a brand through the fabric of her glove. But I find the most interesting things are often found in the heat of the moment. Her mind raced. What did he want to dance? An introduction. He was Harrington's ally. Was this a test? He leaned in closer, his proximity a scandal in itself. The scent of sandalwood and cold night air enveloped her. He was going to speak, and she braced herself for some meaningless society pleasantry. But the words he whispered, meant for her ears alone, were not pleasantries. They were shards of ice, shattering the fragile reality she had built. The nightingale you sketched last April in Regent's Park, he murmured, his breath a warm ghost against her ear. It had a broken wing, a detail most would miss. But your charcoal work was exquisite. You captured its tragedy perfectly. The blood drained from her face. Panic, cold and absolute, seized her. No one knew about that sketch. It was a private study made on a lonely afternoon, weeks before she had ever conceived of Lady Seraphina. She had been no one then, just Elara Vance, a grieving daughter finding solace in her art. No one of note had been in the park that day. No one could possibly know. She pulled her arm from his grasp, her carefully constructed composure crumbling into dust. His whisper had not just shattered her secret, it had obliterated the very foundation of her world. He knew her, not as Lady Seraphina, but as the nobody she truly was. And if the Duke of Blackwood knew, then her quest for justice was not only doomed, it was a death sentence. Without another word, she turned and fled, pushing through the bewildered guests, her sapphire gown a blur of panicked flight. She did not look back, but she could feel his eyes on her, a knowing, inescapable gaze that promised this was not an ending, but a terrifying beginning. The grey London dawn did little to dispel the terror of the previous night. Elara sat in her small, sparsely furnished room above a Bloomsbury bookshop, the borrowed sapphire gown lying like a dead thing across a chair. The silver mask was on the table, its empty eyes mocking her. This was her reality. Not gilded ballrooms, but the scent of old paper and ink, the distant rumble of carts on the street, and the gnawing anxiety of debt. The illusion of Lady Seraphina was funded by selling her father's few remaining books and her own anonymous sketches, a desperate, dwindling resource. The Duke's whisper echoed in her mind. The nightingale. How could he possibly know? Had he been watching her? And for how long? The questions spiraled, each more frightening than the last. He wasn't just Harrington's associate. He was an omniscient threat she had never anticipated. Her chaperone and sponsor in this deception, a kindly but faded widow named Mrs. Gable, had arranged everything. It was Mrs. Gable who had coached her on etiquette, secured the invitations, and provided the backstory for the reclusive Lady Seraphina Beaumont. She had been a friend of Elara's mother, and she despised Harrington for what he'd done. When Mrs. Gable arrived later that morning, she found Elara pale and distraught. "My dear, you look as if you've seen a ghost," she said, her brow furrowed with concern. Worse, Elara breathed, recounting the encounter with the Duke. Mrs. Gable's face went ashen. The Duke of Blackwood. Are you certain he described a sketch I made before I ever became Seraphina? He knows Mrs. Gable. He knows I am a fraud. This is a catastrophe, the older woman whispered, sinking into a chair. He is one of the most powerful men in England. If he chose to expose you, he won't, Elara said, a new steely resolve hardening her voice. He would have done it last night if that were his aim. This is something else. A game, perhaps. He wants something. Then you must disappear, Mrs. Gable urged. End this now, Elara. Your father would not want you to risk your life, and let Harrington win, Elara. Shot back her eyes, flashing. Let him build a monument to his greed with my father's genius, never. If the Duke wants to play a game, then I will learn the rules. For the next week, she lived on a knife's edge. She avoided society events, sending notes of regret, citing a sudden illness. She spent her days poring over her father's journals, searching for any clue, any mention of where the final blueprints might be hidden. But fear was a constant companion. Every knock on the door, every shadow in the lane could be him. The confrontation came, as she knew it would not in the glitter of Mayfair, but in the quiet respectability of the Royal Academy of Arts. Elara often went there, finding a strange comfort in being surrounded by the art she loved, a world where she could be herself, if only for an hour. She was standing before a dramatic seascape by J.M.W. Turner, lost in the turbulent brushstrokes, when that same low voice spoke from behind her. A powerful piece. It captures the unforgiving nature of the sea. Much like London society, wouldn't you agree, beautiful on the surface but treacherous underneath? She didn't have to turn to know it was him. The Duke of Blackwood stood beside her, dressed not in formal evening wear, but in a perfectly tailored riding coat of dark grey wool. He looked less like a duke and more like a dangerous predator in its natural habitat. "Your Grace," she said, her voice tight. She did not curtsy. Here she was not Lady Seraphina. She was no one. "I had a feeling I might find you here," he said, his gaze fixed on the painting. "You have an artist's eye." He turned to face her, and his expression was unreadable. Or should I say, Miss Elara Vance. Her name, spoken so plainly in his mouth, was a physical blow. The air rushed from her lungs. This was it. The moment of her unmasking. How she managed to ask, her voice barely a whisper. "I am a collector," he said simply. "I appreciate talent, especially when it is raw and unheralded. I purchased a portfolio of anonymous charcoal sketches from a dealer on the Strand 6 months ago. The work was exceptional. The artist had a unique signature, a tiny stylized EV hidden in the cross-hatching. I made it my business to learn the artist's name. He had bought her sketches, the very ones she had sold to pay for the first month's rent on this room. He had known who she was long before she ever stepped foot in a ballroom. "So you have been watching me all this time," she said, bitterness lacing her words. "Enjoying the spectacle, waiting for the perfect moment to ruin me. If I wanted to ruin you, Miss Vanus, we would not be having this conversation," he replied, his tone even. "We would be having it in a magistrate's office. You are, after all, committing fraud on a rather grand scale." "What do you want from me?" she demanded, her fear transmuting into a desperate boldness. "The same thing you want," he said, and his next words stopped her heart. "I want to see Lord Harrington destroyed." Elara stared at him, utterly bewildered. "But you are his partner. You finance his projects." A flicker of something dark and cold passed through his eyes. "Business partnerships are not friendships. Let us just say that Harrington's ambition has led him to make promises he cannot keep, and enemies he does not know he has. My reasons are my own. Your reasons, however, are written all over your face every time you look at him. He took a step closer. You are playing a very dangerous game with very poor cards, Miss Vance. You seek proof of his theft. You believe his London townhouse or his country estate holds the key. You will fail. His private study is a fortress, and his servants are loyal because they are terrified. Then why are you telling me this? Because your approach, while reckless, is also creative. The Duke said, a ghost of a smile touching his lips. You have managed to get closer to him in 3 months than my own investigators have in a year. You have his attention. He is intrigued by the mysterious Lady Seraphina, which is why we are going to help each other. Elara's mind was reeling. An alliance with this man who held her entire life in his hands. It was madness. I don't trust you, she said flatly. You would be a fool if you did, he answered without missing a beat. And you are no fool, but you have no other choice. Harrington is attending a week-long house party at his country estate Blackwood Manor next month. I have ensured Lady Seraphina is on the guest list. You will go. You will continue your charade, and you will be my eyes and ears inside that house. He was not asking. He was commanding. He was using the secret of her identity as a leash. And what do I get in return? She asked, her chin held high. You get my protection, my resources, and a chance, a real chance at the justice you seek, he said. Refuse and I will walk away. Lady Seraphina will receive a note of regret from the host, and Elara Vance will be left to fight a monster on her own. I wonder how long you would last. The choice was no choice at all. It was a gilded cage for a gilded cage. To save her father's legacy, she had to place her trust in the one man who had the power to utterly destroy it, a man whose motives were as shadowed and complex as he was. Fine, she said, the word tasting like ash. I will go to Blackwood Manor. I will be your spy. Excellent, the Duke of Blackwood said, his face betraying no emotion. Try not to get caught. Harrington is not a forgiving man. The month leading up to the house party at Blackwood Manor was a masterclass in psychological torment. Elara was trapped in a web spun by 2 powerful men. She had to maintain the flawless facade of Lady Seraphina for the benefit of Lord Harrington, while simultaneously acting as a reluctant conspirator for the Duke of Blackwood. Their meetings were clandestine and brief, a feigned chance encounter in the Burlington Arcade, a shared carriage ride for a few blocks, curtains drawn during a manufactured rainstorm, a hushed conversation in the shadowed alcove of a lending library. In these stolen moments, the Duke Alistair provided her with information. He gave her layouts of the manor details on the staff and the daily routines of Lord Harrington. He was ruthlessly efficient, his mind a steel trap. He revealed nothing of his own reasons for wanting Harrington's downfall, and Elara did not ask. Theirs was a partnership of necessity, not of trust. Yet she found herself studying him, intrigued against her will. She saw the weary lines around his eyes that spoke of sleepless nights, the way his jaw tightened when he spoke of Harrington's treachery. There was a wound in him, she realized, one he kept hidden behind a fortress of ducal arrogance. One evening he delivered a small velvet-lined box to her via a trusted messenger. Inside was a pair of exquisite diamond earrings. The attached note was simple and unsigned, a Beaumont heirloom, to be worn at the manor. It was a calculated move. The earrings were real worth a fortune she couldn't even fathom. They lent credibility to her persona, an item no mere impostor could possess. But they were also a collar, a reminder of who was in control, who was funding this charade now. She hated him for it, yet, as she fastened them, their cold weight against her skin was a strange sort of comfort. She was no longer entirely alone in her fight. Blackwood Manor was an imposing Gothic revival estate, all stone towers and crenellated walls, a monument to new money, trying desperately to look like old power. It brooded under a perpetually grey sky, a fitting lair for a man like Harrington. Elara arrived as Lady Seraphina, her performance honed to perfection. She was charming, but distant witty, but reserved. Harrington was clearly captivated. "Lady Seraphina, your presence graces my home," he said, kissing her gloved hand with a proprietary air that made her skin crawl. His eyes lingered on the diamond earrings, a magnificent new acquisition. "Their sparkle is second only to your own." "A gift, my lord," she said smoothly, her heart pounding. "From a family who values their legacy." The double meaning was for herself, alone. The Duke of Blackwood was already there, of course. He greeted her with infuriatingly cool formality, a slight bow and a murmur of Lady Seraphina. To anyone watching, they were near strangers. But across the drawing room, his eyes would meet hers, a silent, demanding question in their depths. "Have you found anything her days were a tense performance?" She joined the ladies for needlepoint and gossip. She walked the manicured gardens with smitten young lords. She played cards in the evening, her mind razor-sharp, listening, always listening. Her nights were spent in sleepless terror. Alistair had tasked her with searching Harrington's private wing, specifically his library, for any sign of her father's blueprints. On the third night, a storm rolled in, lashing the manor with wind and rain. It was the perfect cover. Dressed in a dark robe, her feet bare on the cold stone floors, Elara slipped out of her room. The house was silent, save for the howling wind and the distant rumble of thunder. The Duke's instructions were seared into her memory. Third door on the left east wing. A loose floorboard beneath the Persian rug beside the globe. The east wing was dark, the portraits on the walls like silent, disapproving ghosts. Her heart hammered against her ribs with every step. She found the library, the heavy oak door unlocked, as Alistair had said it would be. The room smelled of leather and cigar smoke, Harrington's scent. A flash of lightning illuminated the room, revealing the massive mahogany desk, the shelves groaning with books, and in the corner, the large, ornate globe. She moved quickly, her hands trembling as she rolled back the heavy rug. She found the edge of the floorboard, her fingers prying at the seam. It lifted with a soft groan. Reaching into the dark, dusty space beneath her fingers, brushed against a cylinder of rolled parchment. Hope, fierce and blinding, surged through her. She pulled it out. It was a scroll tied with a red ribbon. Just as her fingers closed around it, a floorboard creaked in the hallway. Panic seized her. She shoved the scroll into the pocket of her robe, fumbled the floorboard back into place, and kicked the rug over it just as the library door swung open. Lord Harrington stood there, holding a single candle, his face a mask of cold fury. Looking for something Lady Seraphina, he asked, his voice dangerously soft. Her mind went blank with terror. She was caught. It was over. She could think of no plausible lie, no escape. But before she could stammer a reply, another figure appeared in the doorway behind Harrington. It was the Duke of Blackwood, fully dressed, his expression one of bored annoyance. "Harrington, there you are, Alistair," said his voice, cutting through the tension. "I couldn't sleep. I was hoping for a brandy and a game of chess." He glanced at Elara, his eyes showing not a flicker of recognition or alarm. He then looked pointedly at her state of undress, her robe, her bare feet. His gaze shifted back to Harrington, a sardonic brow raised. "Although it appears you are already occupied." "My apologies for the interruption," The insinuation was disgusting but brilliant. It provided an explanation, an illicit, scandalous one for her presence. Harrington's fury slowly morphed into a smug, predatory smile. He clearly believed this new narrative. He thought she had come seeking a midnight tryst with him. Not an interruption at all. Blackwood Harrington purred his eyes, raking over Elara. Lady Seraphina and I were just admiring the storm. He turned to her. Perhaps you should return to your room, my dear, before you catch a chill. Nodding dumbly, her face burning with a mixture of shame and relief, Elara fled past them, not daring to meet Alistair's eyes. She didn't stop until she was safely locked in her own room, the stolen scroll clutched in her hand. Her relief was short-lived. A few moments later there was a soft, insistent knock on her door. She knew who it was. She opened it a crack. Alistair stood there, his face grim. He pushed his way inside, closing the door silently behind him. "Are you insane?" he hissed, his voice a low, furious whisper. "To go in there alone, I told you to wait for my signal." "I had an opportunity," she whispered back, her own anger rising. "I found something." She pulled the scroll from her pocket. He took it from her, his movements swift and sure. He untied the ribbon and unrolled the parchment on her small writing desk. They both stared. It was not her father's work. It was a map intricately drawn detailing shipping routes from the West Indies. But scrawled in the margins were notes, figures, and names. It was a ledger of illegal cargo. Slaves. Elara felt sick. "What is this?" "This," Alistair said, his voice tight with a loathing so profound it seemed to vibrate in the air, "is the real reason I am going to destroy him." He looked at her, and for the first time she saw the truth of the wound he carried. "My mother was of Caribbean descent, a free woman of property my father, the former Duke, fell in love with and married against his family's wishes. They tried to hide her heritage, but Harrington found out. He used that information, threatening to ruin her reputation and our family name, to blackmail my father into financing his first wicked ventures in the slave trade." He finally looked at her, his ducal mask stripped away, revealing the raw pain beneath. "My father was destroyed by the guilt. My mother, she never recovered from the shame of the public whispers he orchestrated. Harrington built his empire on the bones of human misery and the ruin of my family. Your father's blueprints are part of his evil, but this is the root of it." The room was silent, save for the rain against the window. Elara looked from the horrifying map to the Duke's tormented face. The devil's bargain she had made had just become infinitely more complicated. She was no longer just fighting for her father's legacy. She was now a soldier in a much older, darker war, allied with a man whose secrets were as deep and dangerous as her own. And she knew with chilling certainty that Harrington's evil was far greater than she had ever imagined. The discovery of the slave ledger changed everything. Their alliance, once a cold transaction, was now forged in the heat of a shared righteous fury. The rest of the house party passed in a blur of feigned pleasantries and secret urgent glances. Alistair's public dismissal of her in the library had worked perfectly. Harrington now saw Elara as a conquest to be pursued, and Alistair as a rival to be disdained, a miscalculation that played directly into their hands. Back in London, the dynamic between them shifted. Alistair abandoned the pretense of clandestine meetings. He began to call on Lady Seraphina openly at the modest but respectable address Mrs. Gable kept in Mayfair. To the world it looked like a courtship. The powerful reclusive Duke of Blackwood was finally showing interest in a lady, the enigmatic Seraphina Beaumont. The gossip columns were alight with speculation. For Elara, it was a dizzying and dangerous performance. In public, she was the demure object of a duke's affection. She sat with him in his opera box, her hand resting lightly on his arm, acutely aware of the hundreds of eyes on them. They danced a waltz at the Duchess of Richmond's ball, moving as one entity, a universe of unspoken words passing between them in the space of a single turn. He would lean in ostensibly to whisper a compliment, but would instead murmur, "Harrington's ship, the Providence, is docked at the West India Quay. The manifest is forged." In private, in the quiet of Mrs. Gable's parlour, they were co-conspirators. They spread the map across the table, piecing together Harrington's network. Elara's artistic skills proved invaluable. With her steady hand and eye for detail, she was able to forge a letter in Harrington's secretary's hand, requesting documents from his solicitor documents Alistair's agents could then intercept. "Your talent is truly remarkable," Miss Vance Alistair said one afternoon, watching her perfectly replicate the secretary's looping signature. "Please," she said, not looking up from her work. "Call me Elara. It feels absurd to be called Miss Vance when you are the only person in this city who knows that is my name." He grew quiet. "Very well. Elara." Her name on his lips sounded different. It was not the formal address of a duke, but something softer, more personal. A fragile intimacy began to grow in the spaces between their plans and deceptions. He would bring her small things, a rare pigment for her watercolors he'd sourced from an importer, a book of poetry he thought she might enjoy. She in turn found herself noticing the way he ran a hand through his dark hair when he was deep in thought, or the rare, genuine smile that would transform his severe features when one of their small schemes succeeded. She was falling for him. The realization was as terrifying as any of Harrington's threats. She was a commoner, an imposter, in love with a duke. It was an impossible, ruinous fantasy. This man knew her as a lie. Any affection he showed, she reasoned, was merely for the role she played in his grand plan for revenge. Her heart, she told herself sternly, was a counterfeit, just like her title. It was a weakness she could not afford. One rain-swept evening, he arrived at Mrs. Gable's unannounced. His valet stood in the hall with a large oilskin-wrapped package. "I have something for you," Alistair said, his usual composure slightly frayed. He seemed agitated. He unwrapped the package himself, revealing a large framed painting. It was a stunning portrait of a woman with warm, intelligent eyes and a kind smile, her dark hair woven with pearls. She stood on a balcony, overlooking a sea of sugarcane fields. "My mother," he said, his voice thick with emotion. "The Duchess of Blackwood. This was painted a year before she died." Elara stared at the portrait, speechless. The woman was beautiful, exuding a quiet strength and grace. "She's magnificent, Alistair." Harrington's whispers followed her everywhere. He said, his back to her, as he stared at the painting. He made people believe she was an exotic curiosity, a savage tamed by a duke's title. He poisoned her life. This portrait is all I have left of the woman she was before he broke her spirit. He finally turned to face Elara, his eyes burning with an intensity that stole her breath. That is why he cannot be allowed to win. Justice is not enough. He needs to be erased. In that moment, he was not the Duke of Blackwood. He was just a son grieving and vengeful. An instinct she couldn't suppress made her step forward and place her hand on his arm. "We will see him ruined," she said softly. "For your mother, and for my father." He looked down at her hand, then back to her face. The space between them crackled with a tension that had nothing to do with their shared enemy. He slowly raised his free hand and cupped her cheek, his thumb gently stroking her skin. His touch was electric, a jolt of truth in a life built on lies. Elara, he breathed, and his carefully constructed walls seemed to crumble. This entire affair, pretending to court you, it has not felt like pretending for a very long time. He was going to kiss her. She could see it in his eyes, feel it in the charged air. And she wanted him to. With a desperation that terrified her, she wanted this one real thing in her counterfeit life. But then the logical self-preservative part of her mind screamed in protest. He was a duke. She was a fraud. This could only end in heartbreak for her and scandal for him. He was caught up in the drama of their shared purpose, mistaking camaraderie for something more. She could not let this happen. Summoning every ounce of her resolve, she pulled away her hand, dropping from his arm. "Your Grace," she said, her voice colder than she intended, retreating behind the formal address like a shield. "We should not forget what this is. An arrangement. We must not get distracted." The hurt in his eyes was immediate and sharp, a shutter falling over the vulnerability he had just shown her. He straightened up the Duke of Blackwood once more. The moment was shattered. "Of course," he said, his voice clipped and formal. "You are right. A distraction. My apologies, Lady Seraphina." He turned and left without another word, leaving her alone with the portrait of his mother and the deafening sound of her own foolish, counterfeit heart breaking. She had done the right thing, the only thing she could do. But as the rain beat against the window pane, she feared she had just made the biggest mistake of her life. The chill from that aborted moment of intimacy lingered between them for days. Their meetings became strictly business again, their conversations clipped and efficient. Alistair was polite remote, the Duke once more. Elara threw herself into their plans with a frantic energy, desperate to outrun the ache of what she had thrown away. The closer they got to ensnaring Harrington, the sooner this would be over. The sooner she could disappear from Alistair's life and spare them both the inevitable pain. Their goal was now twofold: recover her father's blueprints and find irrefutable proof of Harrington's slave trading that would stand up in a court of law. The map was damning, but Harrington could claim it was a forgery. They needed something more. They needed his private ledger, the book that reconciled the accounts of his legal and illegal enterprises. Alistair's sources confirmed the ledger was kept in a state-of-the-art Chubb safe in his London study, the very room Elara had barely escaped at Blackwood Manor. A direct assault was impossible. They needed Harrington to open the safe for them. And so Elara, the architect's daughter, designed a trap worthy of her father's name. The plan was audacious, relying on Harrington's greed and his inflated ego. Alistair, in his public role as Harrington's business partner, would approach him with a proposition. A new investor, a wealthy Swiss industrialist played by one of Alistair's most trusted men, a Mr. Dubois, was interested in financing a massive expansion of their shipping network. This investor, however, was famously paranoid about security. Before he would commit his funds, his representative needed to witness the legendary security of Lord Harrington's private safe. Harrington, desperate for the capital and eager to show off, would surely agree. He would arrange a demonstration. Mr. Dubois would be present, along with Alistair. Elara's role was the most dangerous. She would also need to be in that room. "He is besotted with you," Alistair had said, his face impassive as they planned. "He will want to show off for you, most of all. I will suggest that Lady Seraphina, a lady of impeccable taste and discretion, join us to admire his collection of rare artifacts, which are also kept in the safe." The bait was Elara herself. The final piece of the trap was her unique talent. While Harrington was boasting and displaying the contents of his safe to the investor, Elara would need to see the ledger. Her task was not to steal it, That would be impossible. Her task was to memorize it. Alistair had tested her. He would show her a complex schematic for a few minutes, and she could replicate it from memory with near-perfect accuracy. Her artist's mind, trained to observe and retain detail, was their secret weapon. She would be the witness, her memory, the unimpeachable evidence. The night of the demonstration arrived. Elara felt as though she were walking to her own execution. She wore a gown of pale gold, a stark contrast to the darkness of the task ahead. The Beaumont diamonds. Alistair's gift felt like weights at her ears. As she and Alistair arrived at Harrington's townhouse, he spoke to her in the carriage, his voice low and urgent. Remember the signal. If anything goes wrong, knock over the crystal decanter on the sideboard. My men are waiting outside. Do not be a hero, Elara. Your safety is paramount. The last sentence was spoken with an unguarded warmth that made her heart ache. She simply nodded, unable to trust her own voice. Harrington's study was as opulent and soulless as she remembered. Rich mahogany, the scent of brandy, and a massive black iron safe squatting in the corner like a malevolent toad. Harrington was in his element, preening before them. Mr. Dubois, a stern-faced man with a flawless Swiss-French accent, played his part to perfection, asking pointed questions about locking mechanisms and steel thickness. And now, gentlemen, and my dear Lady Seraphina Harrington, said with a flourish, the heart of my enterprise. He produced a key and began to manipulate the dials of the combination lock. The tumblers fell with a series of heavy, satisfying clicks. He swung the massive door open. The interior was lined with velvet. There were stacks of gold sovereigns, deeds, and several jewel cases. But on the main shelf, unmistakable, were two items. A large, leather-bound book with a simple H embossed in gold, and beside it a familiar-looking cylinder of rolled parchment. Her father's blueprints. Seeing them there so close sent a jolt through her. For a moment she forgot everything else. Her father's hands had drawn those lines. His mind had conceived of the elegant, impossible arches. They were her purpose, her entire reason for being in this room. Harrington pulled out the ledger first. My private accounts, he boasted, opening it for Dubois to see. Every transaction, every ship, every shilling recorded and secured. This was her moment. While Harrington and Dubois discussed the book, Elara's eyes devoured the pages. Columns of figures, names of ships, the providence, the galleon's coin dates, and cargo descriptions listed as ebony, and ivory, cruel euphemisms she now understood. Her mind worked furiously, capturing the page like a camera's plate, committing the damning evidence to memory. And this, Harrington said, closing the ledger and picking up the scroll, is the future. He began to unroll it. A revolutionary bridge design that will make us all legends. He looked directly at Elara, his smile triumphant. And in that instant, something in his expression shifted. The triumphant gleam became something sharper, crueler, a look of dawning, horrifying realization. His eyes flickered from the blueprints in his hands down to Elara's face, a face he had only ever known as Seraphina Beaumont. He stopped speaking. The silence in the room was absolute. Extraordinary, he whispered, but he was no longer looking at the blueprints. He was staring at her. The detail, the cross-hatching on the support struts. It is a very distinctive style. He slowly rolled the parchment back up, his eyes never leaving hers. He had seen her sketches. Perhaps not the Nightingale, but others. Or perhaps her father had described his gifted daughter's artistic signature to him back when they were still colleagues before the betrayal. The connection, dormant for months, had just fired in his brain. He looked at Alistair, then back at Elara. The smug smile returned, but it was transformed into a mask of pure evil. "It seems, Your Grace, Lord Harrington," said softly, his voice dripping with venom that we have all been victims of a most elaborate piece of theatre. A very talented artist has been in our midst. He took a step towards Elara. Tell me, my dear, does the name Vance mean anything to you? The trap had snapped shut. But Elara wasn't sure who had just been caught. The world seemed to slow down. Harrington's question hung in the air, a death sentence delivered with a smile. Mr. Dubois stood frozen. Alistair's face was a granite mask, but Elara could see the fury gathering in his eyes like a storm front. Elara's own blood ran cold. He knew the final domino had fallen. Her carefully constructed world had just been leveled. I'm afraid I don't understand, she said, her voice a reedy imitation of Lady Seraphina's cool tones. Oh, I think you do, Harrington sneered, tossing the blueprints onto his desk. He walked over to a bookshelf and pulled out a slim portfolio. He opened it and held it up. It was one of her sketches, a landscape of the Thames she had sold months ago to the same dealer Alistair had used. The signature you see, that clever little EV in the reeds, identical to the flourishes on the bridge designs. Thomas Vance often boasted of his artist daughter, Elara. How foolish of me not to connect it sooner. He turned his poisonous gaze on Alistair. And you, Blackwood, you knew all along. This clumsy ruse with a Swiss investor. You brought the viper into my home. Was this all for her? A duke so besotted with a common deceiver that he would risk a war with me? Before Alistair could respond, the study door opened. But it was not Alistair's men. It was Mrs. Gable. Elara stared, utterly bewildered. Her kind, gentle sponsor, her mother's old friend, stood in the doorway, her face pale and her hands trembling. She wouldn't meet Elara's eyes. Mrs. Gable Elara whispered, a new dreadful suspicion dawning. An excellent performance from you as well, Madam Harrington, said to the older woman with a cruel chuckle. You trained her well, though your loyalty was always easier to purchase. The betrayal was a physical blow, knocking the air from Elara's lungs. Mrs. Gable, her only ally, her confidant, had been Harrington's spy all along. He knows about my husband's gambling debts, Mrs. Gable mumbled, tears streaming down her face. He threatened to have him thrown in Fleet Prison. I had no choice, Elara. I'm so sorry. So you see, I have known about the little plot for weeks. Harrington gloated, circling them like a shark. Ever since our dear Mrs. Gable informed me that Lady Seraphina was asking far too many questions about my library, I allowed the charade to continue. I wanted to see what you were truly after. And now I know. He strode to the fireplace and pulled the bell cord. I believe this evening's entertainment is over. You, my dear Miss Vance, will be charged with fraud and conspiracy. You will end your days in Newgate. As for you, your grace, he said to Alistair, this attempt at industrial espionage will ruin you. When I reveal this to our partners, your reputation will be in tatters. You will be a pariah. Heavy footsteps sounded in the hall. Two burly footmen, clearly hired for their muscle, appeared at the door. It was over. Every escape route was closed. Elara looked at the crystal decanter on the sideboard. The signal. But what was the point? Alistair's men outside could do nothing against a public accusation of fraud. They would all be implicated. But Alistair did not look defeated. He looked calm. You are a fool, Harrington, he said, his voice quiet but carrying immense weight. Am I? Harrington laughed. I hold all the cards. You hold a handful of dust, Alistair retorted. He turned his head slightly towards the door. You may enter now, Sir Robert. Through the door, past the bewildered footman, stepped a stern, grey-haired man whose face was known to all of London. Sir Robert Peel, the Home Secretary. He was flanked by 2 officers of the newly formed Bow Street Runners. Harrington's jaw dropped. "Sir Robert, what is the meaning of this, Lord Harrington?" Sir Robert said, his voice booming with authority. "I am here with a warrant for your arrest on charges of engaging in and profiting from the illegal slave trade, a capital offence." "What, that's absurd. It's a lie fabricated by my rival, Harrington," sputtered, gesturing wildly at Alistair. "Is it?" Alistair asked smoothly. He looked at Elara, a universe of meaning in his eyes. "Miss Vannas, would you be so kind as to describe the 5th and 6th columns on page 42 of Lord Harrington's private ledger?" Harrington's face went white. Taking a steadying breath, Elara closed her eyes and recited what she had burned into her memory. The 5th column lists cargo. The 6th lists purchase price. On page 42, the ship Providence entry, dated May 10th, 1817. Cargo 112 units of ebony. Purchase price £4,480. She opened her eyes and looked directly at Sir Robert. £448 is £40 per unit. The market price for a healthy slave in the West Indies, Sir Robert. Sir Robert Peel nodded grimly. He had clearly been briefed. "We have corroborating evidence from the port authorities and testimony from a ship's captain in our custody. Your Swiss investor." "Harrington has been an agent of the Crown for the last 6 months, investigating your affairs at my request, prompted by initial evidence provided by the Duke of Blackwood." Mr. Dubois gave a curt, formal bow. The truth crashed down on Elara. This was never just about her and Alistair. This was a massive, coordinated sting operation. Alistair hadn't been working alone. He had been working with the highest levels of government. The entire house party, the courtship, the demonstration, it was all part of a much grander trap. Alistair had used her, yes, but he had also shielded her within a fortress of a plan she hadn't even been able to see. "Seize him," Sir Robert commanded. As the Bow Street Runners moved forward, Harrington, in a final act of enraged madness, lunged for the blueprints on his desk and threw them into the roaring fireplace. "If I am ruined," he screamed, "so is your father's memory." "No," Elara cried out, moving forward, but it was too late. The dry parchment caught instantly curling into black ash. Her proof, the physical manifestation of her father's genius, was gone forever. The officers dragged the struggling, cursing Lord Harrington from the room. Mrs. Gable collapsed into a sobbing heap. Sir Robert Peel gave Alistair a solemn nod and followed his men out. Elara stood staring at the fire tears, blurring her vision as the last of the scroll was consumed by the flames. She had won. Harrington was destroyed. But the one thing she had set out to recover was lost. She was vaguely aware of Alistair dismissing Mr. Dubois and the footman. Then he was beside her, his presence, a solid warmth in the suddenly quiet room. "He is gone," Elara Alistair said softly. "It's over. He burned them," she whispered, her voice breaking. "My father's designs, they're gone." "The designs are not gone," Alistair said. He reached into the inner pocket of his coat and pulled out a second identical-looking scroll. He gently placed it in her hands. Harrington was a creature of habit. He had a copy made for his engineers. "I had my men retrieve it from his office at the docks 2 nights ago." What he burned was the copy. "This," he said, his fingers brushing hers as she took the scroll, "is the original. Your father's hand. His signature." She stared at him, then down at the scroll in her hands, her tears now falling freely. He had thought of everything. He had protected her mission and her father's legacy, even when she didn't know it. The mask of Lady Seraphina was gone. The grand masquerade was over. And in the wreckage of lies and secrets, only 2 people remained, Elara Vance, an artist's daughter, and Alistair Finch, the Duke, who had shattered her secrets, only to help her find her truth. The fall of Lord Harrington was as swift as it was scandalous. In his place, London society found a new obsession, Elara Vance, the Bloomsbury Avenger. Her father's name was vindicated his revolutionary bridge design, commissioned by the Crown in an act of public restitution. Justice, it seemed, was served. But fame was another gilded cage Elara did not want. She found solace in her Bloomsbury rooms, until a knock on her door brought the Duke of Blackwood, not with ducal formality, but with the quiet earnestness of a man named Alistair. He stood amidst her charcoal sketches and scattered books, the world she had once hidden. "I apologize for the danger I put you in," he began, his voice raw with sincerity. "But I will not apologize for falling in love with you. Not the phantom Lady Seraphina, but Elara Vance, the brilliant, courageous artist. He spoke of his own parents, of a love that had defied title and station, a legacy he intended to honor. I want a life with you, Elara. No more masks, no more secrets. Only us." Tears welled in Elara's eyes. This wasn't a prize, it was a partnership. "And will you give up your brooding in shadowy corners, your grace?" she asked, a smile finally breaking through. A genuine grin transformed his face. "Only if you will endure my terrible chess." He held out his hand, and she took it, her charcoal-dusted fingers lacing with his. The kiss they shared was not a whisper in the dark, but a promise in the daylight, the first beautiful line of a future they would write together. And so, a story that began with a whisper at a masquerade ball ended with a promise spoken in the honest light of day. Elara Vance, who wore a mask to reclaim her past, found her true self and an unexpected future. Alistair Finch, a duke haunted by secrets, found redemption and love by embracing the truth. Their journey reminds us that sometimes the most profound love isn't about finding the perfect person, but about having the courage to unmask our true selves for the imperfect person who sees and values us for who we really are. If this story of secrets, revenge, and forbidden love captured your imagination, please let me know in the comments below. What was your favorite twist? Don't forget to like this video, share it with fellow lovers of history and romance, and most importantly, subscribe to the channel for more stories that bring the past to life. Thank you for listening.